Too poor to contribute? Take your turkey back. That's what my sister texted after I left Thanksgiving dinner with the $75 turkey I'd paid for. Been helping my cousin Daniel with his bills for nearly 18 months. Rent, groceries, even his car insurance. That night, he laughed when Aunt Martha said, "I shouldn't have bothered bringing anything, since everyone knows you're barely making ends meet." I stayed silent, but as they carved my turkey, something inside me finally snapped. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I remember standing in my apartment kitchen, the one with the peeling yellow wallpaper and the window that never quite closed right, staring at my bank account on my phone. It was 3 days before Thanksgiving. I was trying to figure out how to stretch my last $200 until payday next week. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was worried about money while simultaneously planning to spend $1.75 on a free-range turkey for a family dinner where I knew I wouldn't be appreciated. The notification from my banking app pinged again, another overdraft warning. I sighed and closed it, already knowing what it would say. This was the third one this month, each one a digital reminder of how much I'd given up for Daniel. My cousin, who had moved in with me just for a couple weeks after losing his job at the tech startup where he'd been working. Those couple of weeks had stretched into 18 months of financial drain that had left me with a maxed-out credit card and a savings account that existed in name only. Outside my window, the November sky was already darkening at 4:30 p.m., the streetlights flickering. On a long Elmwood Avenue, the same street I'd grown up on, just 6 blocks from where the rest of my family still lived in the sprawling Victorian house my grandparents had bought in the 70s. The same family that still saw me as the struggling artist who couldn't get her life together, even though I was now working 50-hour weeks as a graphic designer just to keep us both afloat. I put my phone down and went back to making my grocery list for Thanksgiving. Turkey, potatoes, cranberries, green beans, and the ingredients for my grandmother's apple pie recipe, the one thing. I always contributed to family dinners because it was the one thing everyone actually looked forward to. The total came to almost $120, which would leave me with less than $80 to last until next Friday. I'd have to skip lunch at work again this week, maybe cancel my therapy appointment too, just like I'd been doing for months. The phone rang, its harsh tone cutting. Through my calculations, it was Mom, probably calling about Thanksgiving plans. I hesitated before answering, knowing exactly how the conversation would go. "Alina, are you still bringing the turkey on Thursday?" Her voice was chipper, expectant. "My mom, yes." "Still bringing the turkey," I replied, trying to keep the weariness out of my voice. "Wonderful. And Daniel's coming too, right? Aunt Martha's so looking forward to seeing him. She doesn't stop talking about how proud she is of him for getting back on his feet after that awful layoff." Glanced toward Daniel's closed bedroom door, behind which he was probably playing video games or scrolling through job listings he had no intention of applying to. Back on his feet was a generous interpretation of my cousin's current situation. He'd been promising to find a new job for over a year, each interview falling through for increasingly implausible reasons. "He'll be there," I said, not wanting to get into it again. The last time I'd mentioned to Mom that Daniel wasn't contributing financially, she'd reminded me that family takes care of family, and how my grandfather had supported her brothers when times were tough. The difference, which no one seemed to recognize, was that my uncles had eventually paid him back. Perfect. Oh, and Alina, let's try to dress up a little this year. Aunt Martha mentioned that your outfit at Easter looked a bit worn, she said. It casually, like she was suggesting I bring an extra napkin or arrive 10 minutes earlier. I looked down at my sweater, the one I'd had since college, its cuffs fraying slightly at the edges. It was comfortable and still perfectly good, but apparently not good enough for a family that judged success by the label on your clothes rather than the content of your character. "I'll see what I can do, Mom," I replied, knowing I couldn't afford anything new, but unwilling to have that conversation now. After we hung up, I leaned against the counter, the cold laminate pressing into my palms. I was 32 years old, with a college degree in what should have been a well-paying job, yet here I was, counting pennies and being lectured about my appearance by people who had no idea how much I was sacrificing. It had started in April of last year, when Daniel showed up at my door with 2 suitcases and a story about his startup folding unexpectedly. His eyes were red-rimmed, his normally perfect hair disheveled. He looked lost in a way that reminded me of when we were kids and he'd gotten separated from the group at the state fair. I'd been the one to find him then, hiding behind a cotton candy stand, too proud to admit he was scared. "It's just until I get back on my feet, Elena," he'd said, his voice breaking slightly. 2 weeks tops. "I've got some interviews lined up already." I'd believed him then. Daniel had always been the golden child of the family, charming, successful, the one who'd gone to an Ivy League school while I attended the state university on scholarship. If anyone could bounce back quickly, it would be him. So I'd cleared out my home office, set up the pull-out couch, and welcomed him in. It was what family did, after all. What I didn't expect was how quickly 2 weeks would turn into a month. Then 3, then a year and a half of excuses and broken promises. At first, it was small things. He needed money for a haircut before an interview. His phone bill was overdue, and he couldn't receive calls from potential employers. His car needed new tires so he could drive to meetings. Each request came with assurances that he'd pay me back as soon as he had his first paycheck. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I dipped into my savings, telling myself it was an investment in his future. But the interviews never materialized into offers, always for reasons beyond his control. The company went with an internal candidate. They implemented a hiring freeze. They loved him, but wanted someone with more experience in a specific software he hadn't used. Meanwhile, my own expenses kept mounting. Rent in our neighborhood had increased by 15% in the past year. My healthcare premiums went up. The brakes on my car needed replacing. Normal life stuff that I would have been able to handle if I wasn't also covering Daniel's share of everything. I started small at first, bringing lunch from home instead of buying it, canceling my streaming subscriptions, selling clothes I didn't wear often. Then it escalated to bigger sacrifices, postponing dental work I needed, declining invitations. 2 friends' weddings because I couldn't afford the travel, picking up freelance projects on weekends when I should have been resting. All while Daniel continued to live as if nothing had changed. He still ordered takeout several times a week, still bought expensive hair products and cologne, still went out with his friends on weekends, coming home with stories about the new bar they'd tried or the concert they'd attended. When I finally worked up the courage to ask him about contributing to rent, just a partial amount, anything, to ease the burden, he looked genuinely surprised, as if the thought had never occurred to him. "But I'm not working, Elena," he said, his tone suggesting I was being unreasonable. "How am I supposed to pay rent without an income?" "Maybe you could cut back on going out," I suggested. "Or take any job for now, even if it's not in your field. Just until something better comes along." He'd laughed at that, actually laughed. "Work at a coffee shop? Now with my MBA? Can you imagine what Aunt Martha would say?" And there it was. The family reputation, the appearances that mattered more than reality. Job, because of what the family would think. Yet none of them seemed concerned about the toll his unemployment was taking on me. The worst part wasn't even the money, though that was bad enough. It was the way he'd begun to talk about me too. Rest of the family. Small comments at Sunday dinners about how I was always stressing about money or becoming obsessed with budgeting. Jokes about me being a workaholic when I stayed late at the office to earn overtime pay that would help cover our bills. Mom and Aunt Martha would exchange looks over the roast chicken, clucking sympathetically about how I'd always been so intense and never learned to enjoy life. As if my desire to remain financially solvent was some character flaw rather than a necessity. By summer, I was drowning. My credit card was maxed out at $7,500. I'd emptied my emergency fund. I'd even withdrawn $3,000 from my 401k, paying the penalty and taxes because I didn't have any other choice. All while Daniel continued to promise that his big break was just around the corner. "I've got a good feeling about this interview," he'd say, looking more excited than he had in months. The hiring manager practically guaranteed me the position. I'd nod and smile, wanting to believe him but no longer able to fully trust his optimism. How many guaranteed positions had Fallen through already? How many more months could I keep this up? The breaking point should have come in August, when I discovered he'd been using my Amazon account to order expensive electronics, a new gaming headset, wireless earbuds, a smartwatch, all charged to my credit card. When confronted, he'd shrugged it off. I needed them for networking. You want me to get a job, right? How am I supposed to connect with people in tech if I don't have the right gear? I should have kicked him out then. Should have stood my ground and demanded he leave, or at least start contributing, but there was always some reason to give him one more chance. He had an interview coming up. Holidays were approaching. The lease renewal was still months away. So I swallowed my anger, cut back even more on my own expenses, and kept hoping things would change. I sold my collection of vintage vinyl records that I'd been building since college, canceled my gym membership and started running in the park. Instead, learned to trim my own hair from YouTube tutorials rather than going to a salon. And now, standing in my kitchen 3 days before Thanksgiving, staring at the grocery list that would deplete the last of my funds. I wondered how much longer I could keep this charade going. How much more of myself I would have to sacrifice before anyone in my family noticed what was happening. The morning of Thanksgiving dawned clear and cold, the kind of crisp November day that smelled like wood smoke and fallen leaves. I'd been up since 5 a.m. prepping the turkey, making pie dough, and trying not to think about the overdraft fees that would hit my account when the grocery store charges went through. Daniel emerged from his room around 10, hair perfectly styled, wearing a new sweater I didn't recognize. He grabbed a mug of the coffee I'd made and leaned against the counter, watching me work. "Need any help?" he asked, though his tone suggested he was hoping I'd say no. "Could you peel the potatoes?" I nodded toward the bag on the counter, already knowing what his response would be. I would, but I promised to video chat with a networking contact before we head over. Guy works for Google, potential referral. He raised his coffee in a salute and retreated back to his room. I continued working, my hands moving mechanically through tasks I'd done dozens of times before, chopping, mixing, seasoning, all, while a bitter taste grew in my mouth that had nothing to do with the cranberries I was cooking down with orange zest. When it was time to leave, Daniel helped carry dishes to my car without being asked, surprising me with his thoughtfulness, until I realized he was just eager to get to the family dinner. He chatted animatedly during the short drive to the family home, telling me about the job prospect that was practically a sure thing and how he might be able to pay me back at least some of what I owe by Christmas. I nodded along, no longer believing any of it, but too tired to call him out. Today wasn't about Daniel or our financial situation. It was about getting through dinner with my dignity intact. It's about showing up with the turkey I'd spent my last dollars on and pretending everything was fine. The house was already buzzing with activity when we arrived. Mom greeted us at the door, kissing Daniel on both cheeks before giving me a quick hug and immediately commenting on the dark circles under my eyes. "Working too hard again, Alina? You should take better care of yourself." She frowned, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear like I was still a child. "Just busy, Mom," I replied, maneuvering past her with the turkey. "Where should I put this?" "Oh, give that to Daniel to carry to the kitchen. Aunt Martha wants to see you in the living room right away." I reluctantly handed the heavy roasting pan to Daniel, who accepted it with surprising care and made my way to the living room, where Aunt Martha held court in her usual armchair, a glass of sherry already in hand despite the early hour. "Alina, darling," she exclaimed, extending her hand for me to kiss rather than rising to hug me.
At 76.
She still dyed her hair the same auburn shade she'd worn since her 30s, and dressed exclusively in cashmere and pearls. "Let me look at you." I stood there, feeling like a specimen under a microscope as she examined me from head to toe, her eyes lingering disapprovingly on my sensible flats and the dress I'd bought 3 years ago for a cousin's wedding.
Ow.
"Shopping at discount stores, I see," she said with a sigh. "You know, there's a lovely boutique downtown that's having a sale. Perhaps we could go together sometime. I'd be happy to help you select something more appropriate for family gatherings." The condescension in her voice made my cheeks burn, but I forced a smile. Thank you, Aunt Martha, but I'm quite happy with my wardrobe as it is, she made a dismissive noise in the back of her throat. Suit yourself, dear. Oh, did Daniel tell you his wonderful news? He has an interview with Peterson and Wilcox next week. Senior position, very prestigious. Your Uncle Gerald put in a good word for it. Him, of course. Peterson and Wilcox was one of the top consulting firms in the city, known for their rigorous hiring process and exceptional benefits. If Daniel actually had an interview there, and if he somehow managed to get the job, it would indeed be life-changing for both of us. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased despite my skepticism. He hadn't mentioned it yet. Well, he's been very busy preparing. Gerald says he has an excellent chance, especially with the family connection. She beamed with pride, as if Daniel's potential success was somehow her personal achievement. Before I could respond, Uncle Gerald himself appeared, martini in hand, followed by my cousins Rebecca and Thomas with their respective spouses, all dressed in what looked like catalog-perfect Thanksgiving attire. The conversation quickly turned to Rebecca's recent promotion and Thomas's new summer house, with everyone exclaiming over the photos he passed around on his phone. No one asked about my work or my life. It was as if I was invisible, except when they needed someone to fetch more ice or take a family photo. I played my role dutifully, smiling when appropriate, laughing at Uncle Gerald's tired jokes, complimenting Rebecca on her designer boots that probably cost more than my monthly rent. By the time we sat down to dinner, I was already emotionally exhausted, my cheeks aching from the fake smile I'd been wearing for hours. But I still felt a small surge of pride when Mom brought out the turkey I'd purchased. Golden brown and perfectly roasted. At least I'd contributed something meaningful to the meal, even if it had cost me more than I could afford. The table looked like something from a magazine spread, grandmother's fine china, the silver candlesticks that had been a wedding present to my parents, crystal glasses filled with expensive wine. I took my usual seat at the far end next to the children's table where my younger cousins were already squabbling over who got the drumsticks. Uncle Gerald stood to carve the turkey, raising his glass for the traditional family toast. Another year of blessings and prosperity, he intoned, as he did every Thanksgiving. And to family, the most important thing in life. Everyone raised their glasses in agreement. To family, they echoed. I lifted my glass mechanically, the words tasting hollow in my mouth. What did family even mean in this context? Was it the blind support of Daniel, regardless of how it affected me? Was it the judgment and condescension thinly veiled as concern? Was it the expectation that I would continue to give and give without ever receiving in return? As plates were filled and passed around, the conversation turned to holiday shopping plans. Aunt Martha was describing the cruise she and Uncle Gerald would be taking in December, while Mom detailed the extensive Christmas decorations she planned to put up this year. And what about you, Alina? Aunt Martha asked suddenly, fixing me with her penetrating gaze. Any special plans for the holidays? I hesitated, all too aware of everyone's eyes on me. I'll probably just work through most of December. We have a big client presentation after New Year's. I tried to sound positive, as if spending the holidays alone in my apartment was a choice rather than a financial necessity. Work. During Christmas, Mom's voice rose with dismay. But it's family time. I stabbed at a piece of turkey on my plate, the meat I'd carefully selected and paid for with money I didn't have. Some of us have to work to pay the bills, Mom. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Daniel cleared his throat and quickly changed the subject. The turkey is amazing this year. Who made it? Oh, Alina brought it, Mom said, her tone brightening. Though I did add my special herb butter under the skin. Makes all the difference, doesn't it? I bit my tongue. I had spent hours researching the best brining techniques, had carefully measured herbs and spices, had set my alarm for 5 a.m. to ensure the turkey would be perfect. And now Mom was taking partial credit while dismissing the career I'd worked so hard to build. Actually, I said, my voice steadier than I expected, I brined it overnight with rosemary and orange peel. The herb butter was already part of my recipe. Mom waved her hand dismissively. Well, whatever you did, it turned out fine. A bit dry on the breast, don't you think, Martha? Aunt Martha, never one to miss an opportunity for criticism, nodded sagely. A touch overcooked, perhaps. But we can't all be gourmet chefs, can we? I felt heat rising in my cheeks as I took a sip of water, trying to cool the anger building inside me. The turkey was perfect, moist, flavorful, exactly as it should be. I knew it, and they probably knew it too, but acknowledging my success wasn't part of the family dynamic. Speaking of cooking, Uncle Gerald boomed from the head of the table. Daniel tells me you've been teaching him some recipes, Elena. Good to see you passing on some useful skills. I nearly choked on my water. Daniel hadn't cooked a single meal in the 18 months he'd lived with me. Not once had he so much as boiled water for pasta, yet here he was, nodding along as if we spent our evenings cooking together like some domestic sitcom. Daniel's been too busy with his job search to cook much, I said, unable to let this particular lie stand. Daniel shot me a warning look. But I've been watching and learning. He recovered smoothly. Elena's quite the teacher when she wants to be. Aunt Martha beamed at him. Such a good attitude, always looking to improve yourself. That's why you'll go far, Daniel. You've always had that drive. Ha! I nearly laughed out loud at the irony. Daniel, who hadn't sent out a resume in 3 months according to the browser history on our shared computer, was being praised for his ambition. Meanwhile, I was working myself to exhaustion, taking on additional freelance projects just to keep our lights on, and all I got was criticism about my clothes and cooking. The dinner continued in this vein, with Daniel receiving compliments for fictional accomplishments, while my actual contributions were minimized or criticized. He regaled the table with stories about networking events he'd supposedly attended, dropping names of executives and describing career opportunities that I knew were embellishments at best, outright fabrications at worst. And everyone ate it up, nodding and offering connections, advice, encouragement. Uncle Gerald promised to make another call to his friend at Peterson and Wilcox. Aunt Martha suggested Daniel apply to her country club, where so many important business connections were made on the golf course. Mom reminisced about how Daniel had always been destined for greatness even as a child. As dessert was served, including my grandmother's apple pie recipe that received only a passing acknowledgement, I felt increasingly invisible. It was as if I existed only as a supporting character in Daniel's story, my sole purpose being to provide him with housing, food, and money until he achieved the success everyone seemed to believe was his birthright. The conversation shifted to holiday gifts, with Rebecca describing the elaborate presents she'd already purchased for her children. "We're trying not to spoil them," she said with a laugh that implied the opposite. But Thomas's bonus this year was just too generous not to splurge a little. "What about you, Elena?" Mom asked. "Have you started your shopping yet?" Before I could answer, Aunt Martha interjected. "Oh, I'm sure Elena's being sensible with her money this year. Aren't you, dear?" Her tone was sympathetic, but her eyes held something closer to pity. I felt every pair of eyes at the table turn to me, and suddenly, I couldn't maintain the charade anymore. "Actually, I haven't been able to budget for gifts this year," I said quietly. "Since I've been covering all of Daniel's expenses for the past year and a half." Daniel's fork clattered against his plate. Mom's eyes widened in shock. Uncle Gerald frowned deeply, his bushy eyebrows drawing together like thunderclouds. "Lena," Mom hissed, "this is hardly the time." "When is the time, Mom?" I asked, my voice still calm despite the storm raging inside me. "When is the right time to mention that I've been financially supporting Daniel? While everyone praises him for interviews, he's not going on in jobs he's not applying for." Daniel's face flushed red. "That's not fair, Elena. I've been trying." "Have you?" I turned to face him directly. "When was the last time you actually sent in a job application? When was the last time you contributed anything to our rent or groceries or utilities?" The table had gone completely silent. The only sound, the gentle clink of ice settling in water glasses, and the distant laughter of children at their separate table. Daniel looked around desperately, seeking an ally. "It's temporary," he said, his voice rising slightly. "I told Elena I'd pay her back once I found the right position. I can't just take any job. Why not?" I demanded. "I work 2 jobs to cover our expenses." "What makes you too good for that?" Aunt Martha cleared her throat delicately. "Lena, dear, I think you're making a scene. Perhaps we could discuss this privately after dinner." "There's nothing to discuss," I said, laying my napkin beside my plate. "I've been supporting Daniel completely for 18 months. I've maxed out my credit cards, emptied my savings, and taken money from my retirement account to keep us afloat. And not once has anyone in this family acknowledged it or offered to. Help. Uncle Gerald's frown deepened. Now, Alina, family helps family. When I was starting out, your grandfather gave me a loan too. A loan, I emphasized, which I assume you paid back. Daniel hasn't contributed a single dollar to our household since April of last year. Mom reached across the table to pat my hand condescendingly. Sweetie, I know you're stressed about money, but airing these grievances at Thanksgiving dinner isn't appropriate. We can talk about helping you with your financial planning later. Her complete misunderstanding of the situation, her assumption that I was the one who needed financial advice rather than Daniel needing accountability, was the final straw. I don't need financial planning, Mom. I need Daniel to either start contributing or move out. And I need this family to stop treating me like I'm a failure because I'm struggling to support 2 adults on 1 income. Aunt Martha sighed dramatically. Really, Alina? If you're too poor to contribute properly to family gatherings, perhaps you shouldn't volunteer to bring the main dish. There's no shame in admitting when you can't afford something. The words hit me like a physical blow. 2. Poor to contribute. After everything I'd sacrificed. After stretching my last dollars to bring this turkey to their table, I was being told I shouldn't have bothered. I looked around at their faces, uncomfortable, embarrassed, but not a single one jumping to my defense. Not even Daniel, who knew better than anyone how much I'd given up for him.
Ow.
Something inside me snapped. A lifetime of being the responsible one, the invisible one. The one who gave without receiving it, all crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. Without a word, I stood up, walked to the center of the table, and picked up the turkey platter. With what remained of the bird I'd spent my last dollars on, Lena, Mom gasped, "What are you doing?" I met her eyes calmly. "I'm too poor to contribute. Then I should take my contribution back." "Don't be ridiculous," Aunt Martha sputtered. "Put that down immediately." But I didn't. Instead, I tucked the heavy platter under my arm, turned on my heel, and walked out of the dining room. Through the foyer and out the front door. Behind me, I could hear chairs scraping against the floor and exclamations of shock, but I didn't look back. The cold November air hit my face as I carefully placed the turkey platter on the passenger seat of my car. My hands were shaking, but not from fear or even anger anymore. There was a strange sense of liberation washing over me, a feeling of finally standing up for myself after years of diminishment. I had just closed the car door when Daniel burst out of the house, his face flushed with either embarrassment or anger, possibly both. "What the hell, Alina?" he demanded, rushing down the porch steps. "You can't just leave in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner." I looked at him standing there in his new sweater that I had unknowingly paid for, his hair perfectly styled with products purchased on my credit card, his entire existence subsidized by my labor, and felt nothing but a profound weariness. "Watch me," I said simply, opening my car door. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in harder than necessary. "You're embarrassing yourself." "And me. Come back inside and apologize, and we can forget this happened." I pulled my arm free and looked him directly in the eyes. "No, Daniel. I'm done apologizing for telling the truth. I'm done pretending everything is fine when it's not. And most of all, I'm done carrying you while you lie to everyone, including yourself." "So what? You're just going to drive away with the turkey? Like some crazy person? How is that going to look?" I laughed then, a genuine laugh born from the absurdity of his concern about appearances even now. "I don't care how it looks anymore. That's your obsession, not mine." From the porch, I could see the rest of the family watching our exchange. Their figures silhouetted against the warm light of the house. They looked like a holiday card, perfect and untouchable. While Daniel and I stood in the gathering darkness of the front yard, the reality of our broken relationship exposed for all to see. "If you leave now," Daniel said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper, "don't expect me to cover for you. They'll all know how unstable you really are." The old Alina would have caved at this threat, would have feared the family's judgment enough to swallow her pride and return to the table. But I wasn't that person anymore. In fact, I realized with startling clarity that I hadn't been that person. For a long time, I'd just been playing a role I thought was expected of me. "Tell them whatever you want, Daniel," I said, sliding into the driver's seat. But when you come home tonight, your key won't work. I'm changing the locks tomorrow." His face contorted with shock. "You can't kick me out. Where am I supposed to go?" "Not anymore," I said aloud to the empty room, my voice stronger than I expected. I woke up early the next morning, Friday, with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. The locksmith was scheduled to arrive at 9 a.m., giving me a few hours to prepare. I moved methodically through the apartment, gathering Daniel's belongings and packing them into boxes and suitcases I found in the hall closet. His designer clothes, his collection of expensive colognes, the gaming console he'd purchased using my Amazon account, all of it went into neat piles, ready to be removed from my life. Each item I packed felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself, as if Daniel's possessions had been taking up space not just in my apartment but in my mind. As I worked, I kept my phone on silent, ignoring the barrage of texts and calls from Mom, Aunt Martha, even Uncle Gerald. They could wait. Today was about action, not explanation. The locksmith arrived promptly at 9, a middle-aged woman with capable hands and a no-nonsense attitude. "Standard replacement?" "Yes," I replied, then hesitated. "Actually, can you recommend something particularly secure?" She gave me an appraising look, then nodded. "Having trouble with someone?" I considered how to answer. A few days ago, I might have minimized the situation, might have made excuses for Daniel, or downplayed my concerns. But the new Alina, the one who had walked out of Thanksgiving dinner with a turkey under her arm, was done with pretending. "My cousin has been living with me and taking advantage financially. I'm asking him to leave, and I don't want him to be able to come back when I'm not here." The locksmith nodded without judgment. "I've got just the thing. Digital lock with a keypad. You can change the code any time, and it'll send alerts to your phone when it's used." "Perfect," I said, not even asking the price. Some things were worth the expense. As she worked, I continued packing, occasionally pausing to respond to Rachel's encouraging texts. She'd offered to come help, but I needed to do this myself, to physically engage in the act of removing Daniel from my space. It felt symbolic, necessary. By noon, the new lock was installed, the code set to my birth date, something Daniel would never remember, and the boxes were stacked neatly by the door. The locksmith had left with a parting comment that made me smile. "Changing a lock is easy. Changing a relationship is hard. Good luck with both." "Not anymore," I said aloud to the empty room, my voice stronger than I expected. I woke up early the next morning, Friday, with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. The locksmith was scheduled to arrive at 9 a.m., giving me a few hours to prepare. I moved methodically through the apartment, gathering Daniel's belongings and packing them into boxes and suitcases I found in the hall closet. His designer clothes, his collection of expensive colognes, the gaming console he'd purchased. Using my Amazon account, all of it went into neat piles, ready to be removed from my life. Each item I packed felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself, as if Daniel's possessions had been taking up space not just in my apartment, but in my mind. As I worked, I kept my phone on silent, ignoring the barrage of texts and calls from Mom, Aunt Martha, even Uncle Gerald. They could wait. Today was about action, not explanation. The locksmith arrived promptly at 9, a middle-aged woman with capable hands and a no-nonsense attitude. "Standard replacement?" she asked, assessing. "The front door?" "Yes," I replied, then hesitated. "Actually, can you recommend something particularly secure?" She gave me an appraising look, then nodded. "Having trouble with someone?" I considered how to answer. A few days ago, I might have minimized the situation, might have made excuses for Daniel, or downplayed my concerns. But the new Alina, the one who had walked out of Thanksgiving dinner with a turkey under her arm, was done with pretending. "My cousin has been living with me and taking advantage financially," I said simply. "I'm asking him to leave, and I don't want him to be able to come back when I'm not here." The locksmith nodded without judgment. "I've got just the thing. Digital lock with a keypad. You can change the code anytime, and it'll send alerts to your phone when it's used." "Perfect," I said, not even asking the price. Some things were worth the expense. As she worked, I continued packing, occasionally pausing to respond to Rachel's encouraging texts. She'd offered to come help, but I needed to do this myself, to physically engage in the act of removing Daniel from my space. It felt symbolic, necessary. By noon, the new lock was installed. The code set to my birth date, something Daniel would never remember, and the boxes were stacked neatly by the door. The locksmith had left, with a parting comment that made me smile. Changing a lock is easy. Changing a relationship is hard. Good luck with both. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.